The train hissed and groaned as it pulled into the station, its arrival shattering the stillness of the platform. I stepped on, dragging my luggage behind me, still reeling from the string of disappointments that had led me here. The faint chatter and the rhythmic clinking of wheels on the tracks greeted me as I made my way through the narrow aisle. Most of the compartments were already occupied, the windows framing faces that stared blankly at their phones or the world rushing by. Then I saw him. He was seated near the back of the carriage, one long leg stretched out casually, the other bent with his foot planted firmly on the floor. His dark curls framed a face that was both sharp and soft in all the right places, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips that looked like they could whisper secrets or wreck you entirely. He had an air about him that screamed confidence but not arrogance, like he was used to drawing attention but didn't need to seek it out. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and something about the way his gaze lingered made me shy. I tore my eyes away, chastising myself for the way my stomach flipped. He was a stranger, and I had enough complications in my life without adding a mysterious man on a train to the mix. But fate, or maybe just bad luck, had other plans. The only empty seat was across from him. I hesitated for a moment, the strap of my bag digging into my shoulder as I weighed my options. I could keep walking, try my luck in the next carriage. Or I could sit down, pretend not to notice the way his piercing gaze seemed to see through me, and survive the next few hours without making a fool of myself. Before I could overthink it, he glanced up from his book and nodded towards the empty seat, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Don't worry," he said, his voice low and smooth, like the start of a jazz melody. "I don't bite." Not hard, I thought, before mentally scolding myself again. With a forced smile, I slid into the seat across from him, clutching my bag like a lifeline. The train lurched forward, and I told myself this was just a coincidence, a fleeting moment in time that would mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. I couldn't have been more wrong. The train rumbled beneath us, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks mixing with the soft murmur of the other passengers. I tried to focus on the view outside, the blur of scenery flashing by, but my mind kept returning to him. His presence was magnetic, undeniable. Even now, as he flipped through the pages of his book, I could feel the weight of his gaze and the strange pull it had on me. I glanced at him again, and this time our eyes met. His look was brief, but there was a spark in it, something electric. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes back down to my lap. I was supposed to be going somewhere, escaping the endless cycle of mundane and uninspiring, but somehow, in this moment, I felt a strange connection with this stranger. I shifted uneasily in my seat, my nerves suddenly on edge. His dark eyes seemed to see right through me, and I wasn't sure if that was exciting or terrifying. "Is the book that interesting?" he asked, his voice breaking through the thick silence between us. I blinked, startled, then realized I'd been staring at the pages of his book without actually reading a word. Just distracted, I muttered, feeling foolish. He chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made something inside me flutter. "I can relate. Long journeys do that to a person. Sometimes, it's better to let your mind wander than to get too wrapped up in anything." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. His words were casual, but there was an underlying intensity in the way he spoke. I could feel the weight of every syllable, like there was more to him than just what was said. He closed the book and set it aside, turning fully towards me. "I'm Maxwell," he said, offering me a smile that was both charming and enigmatic. I hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, my palm clammy against his warm skin. "I'm Anderson." "Nice to meet you, Anderson," he said, his fingers brushing against mine in a brief but deliberate contact. I felt it all the way to my core. That touch, so innocent in its intent, sent a jolt of electricity through me. It was like everything in the world had just shifted. "Nice to meet you too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but the words felt strained, like they didn't belong. We fell into an awkward silence. He didn't pull away, though. He just kept looking at me, his eyes dark and knowing, as if he could see right through the layers I kept so carefully guarded. I shifted again, glancing at the door, at the people around us. The train was still quiet, a calm before a storm I didn't know was coming. Without warning, he leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You're not like the others, are you?" I blinked, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" Maxwell's lips curled into a smile, but there was no humor in it, only something far deeper, darker. "You're not pretending. You're not here to pass time or ignore everything. You're here because you're running from something. I can see it in your eyes." I froze. How could he know? I hadn't said anything, hadn't even hinted at the turmoil inside me. But his words, his understanding, struck a chord I hadn't even realized existed. My breath caught in my throat, and I tried to form words, but they seemed to escape me. Before I could say anything, he sat back, his gaze not leaving mine. He was toying with me, testing me, and I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or terrified. "You're just like me, aren't you? Always running, always looking for the next thing, the next escape. But maybe, just maybe, you're not ready to run anymore." I swallowed hard. He was right. I'd been running for so long, but I wasn't sure where to anymore. "Maybe," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise of the train. Maxwell's eyes glinted, and for the first time since I sat down, I realized he wasn't just a stranger. He was a challenge, a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to solve, but couldn't ignore. He leaned closer again, his scent intoxicating, his body heat seeping into mine. "I could show you something different," he said, his voice low and seductive, like a secret shared between only the two of us. "A ride you won't forget." I wasn't sure if I should feel nervous, scared, or excited. But as his lips hovered just inches from mine, as his breath brushed against my skin, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a train ride. It was the start of something wild, something dangerous. I parted my lips to respond, but no sound escaped. He didn't wait. His mouth claimed mine in a fierce, unrelenting kiss that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was raw, demanding, and ignited a fire I hadn't known was there. My pulse thundered in my ears as his hands gripped me, sliding down my back and pulling me impossibly closer. I could taste the urgency, feel the heat of his body pressed against mine, consuming me whole. There was no retreat, no denying what was happening. The walls I'd built crumbled to dust. I was his now, caught in his grasp, and I didn't want to be free. His lips were commanding, urgent, and yet impossibly tender. They claimed mine with a hunger that sent fire down my rod. His touch burned, his hands sliding over my body with a purpose that left me breathless. Every point of contact was a spark, igniting something feral and unstoppable inside me. The heat between us grew, an all-consuming force. His body pressed against mine, firm yet yielding, and I felt myself giving in completely, no resistance, no hesitation. It was intoxicating, dizzying, as though he were the very air I needed to breathe. My fingers found their way to his hair, tangling in the soft strands as I pulled him closer, desperate for more. His scent, a mix of musk and something uniquely his, flooded my senses, grounding me even as everything else spun out of control. The train rocked beneath us, its rhythm matching the wild thrum of my heartbeat. Maxwell's hands roamed lower, his touch firm and unrelenting, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. The space between us vanished, our bodies moving as though they had always known this dance, as though they had waited for this moment. "God, you're everything," Maxwell whispered against my lips, his voice rough, almost a growl. The words sent a fresh wave of heat coursing through me, and I gasped, clutching at him as if he were my anchor in a sea of chaos. The intensity of it all, the kiss, his touch, the raw, unspoken emotions, was overwhelming. But I didn't want it to stop. I wanted more. Needed more. And as the train hurtled forward into the night, so did we, lost in the heat, the urgency, the passion of this moment that felt like it would never end. He pulled back just enough to catch his breath, his forehead resting against mine. "You taste like someone who's been waiting for this," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. I couldn't deny it. I had been waiting for something, for anything, to break the monotony, to shatter the walls I had carefully built around myself. And Maxwell, this beautiful, dangerous stranger, was doing just that. Before I knew what was happening, he shifted and I found myself on my back in the seat, Maxwell hovering over me. His hands roamed down to my waist, tugging at the hem of my shirt, pulling it up slowly, deliberately. Every movement was purposeful, controlled, and it drove me wild. "Relax," Maxwell murmured, his voice low and coaxing, a soothing balm to the inferno igniting between us. "Let go." I exhaled, releasing the tension coiled within me, and his hands, strong, deliberate, began to explore my body like uncharted territory. When his lips grazed the curve of my neck, my breath hitched, a soft gasp escaping before I could hold it back. The sensation wasn't just electric, it was primal, a spark that roared into a blaze, searing through my veins. "Maxwell," I whispered, my voice trembling, a blend of longing and vulnerability. The name felt foreign yet achingly familiar on my lips, a plea, a surrender. My thoughts were a whirlpool of emotions, confusion, desire, fear, but beneath it all was the undeniable pull toward him. It wasn't just want. It was need. A raw, aching need that consumed me whole. His lips captured mine again, harder this time, more insistent, and my world tilted. I didn't think, didn't resist. I let myself fall, let the heat between us take over. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, our bodies pressed together as though they had always belonged like this. The rhythm of the train, the faint, distant hum of the tracks beneath us, only heightened the intimacy of the moment. The world beyond the glass windows blurred into insignificance as Maxwell's touch consumed me. His fingers slid under my shirt, his touch warm and sure, igniting a trail of fire across my skin. I arched into him, every nerve ending alive, every sense heightened. His breath, hot against my ear, sent shivers racing down my spine. "You're beautiful like this," he whispered, his voice rough, edged with hunger. As the train roared into the darkness, so did we, recklessly, passionately, utterly lost in each other. His body moved against mine, his lips exploring, his hands claiming, until there was nothing left but the two of us. Time stopped, and in its place was this, the unrelenting intensity of the moment, of Maxwell, of us. My heart raced, my breath shallow, as we reached the point of no return. And yet, it didn't feel like losing myself. It felt like finding something I'd been searching for all along. When it was over, we stayed there, entangled and breathless, the dim lights of the train all over us. Maxwell looked at me, his gaze soft yet burning with something I couldn't quite name. And as the train hurtled forward into the endless night, I knew this was more than a fleeting moment. It was everything. I may have found the one who would teach me how to love again.